Some of you may work in schizophrenia or other psychosis populations. I know there's a few labs around the Douglas where this population is really prevalent in clinical and research. So what we're doing here is negative symptoms of schizophrenia currently are one of the most debilitating category of symptoms. It really affects the ways that they can, form meaningful relationships or hold down a job, and it's really what affects their life goals. So even though we can get their positive symptoms under control with antipsychotics, which are hallucinations and delusions. Their negative symptoms, which are more similar to depression, have really conflicting results in terms of treatment options. So sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, and there really isn't a solid standardized method or treatment that can actually help patients with these symptoms. So what we're looking into is TMS, or transcranial magnetic stimulation, in an accelerated form. So typically TMS procedures are, or treatments, they're 30-minute sessions multiple times a week for 3 to 6 weeks. What we're testing is an accelerated version where it's 10-minute sessions of stimulation every hour for 10 hours for 5 days straight. It sounds really excessive, but it has a lot of promise. Dr. Lena Palaniappan, his team at PavT, they had the Implement study, which was similar. They ran a more traditional TMS protocol for negative symptoms, and they had really good results. So we're kind of taking that and doing it a kind of one step further and testing out a more accelerated protocol to see if it has, greater efficacy. So this is kind of how our treatment week looks for participants. Baseline day, they do an fMRI scan. So part of the treatment is a neuronavigation aspect where we can specifically target the exact area of their brain where treatment would be most effective. So we do an fMRI scan, a bunch of assessments, and then we also include some cognitive assessments, so a cognitive battery, and then also 2 other computer tasks to see how treatment might affect the other domains of schizophrenia. Treatment week, as I mentioned, 10 sessions a day for 10 hours for 5 days straight. It seems very intense, but it's a lot of break time. It's 50 minutes of break in between sessions. So the days are just long, but it's a lot of breaks. And then we have a follow-up at 1 week and 1 month. And 3 months. So this is a multi-site trial, very proud to say that. So we're not just running here at the Douglas. There's 2 other sites, Cerveau in Université de Laval, all the way in Quebec City, and then also IUSMM at UDM. So that's really nice that we have this study running in multiple places. We have 3 arms. So the treatment, like I mentioned, it involves neuronavigation to specifically target. Now, neuronavigation is very costly. You have to do an fMRI scan, and it kind of increases burden for participants. So what we're trying to see additionally is it necessary for treatment? Because if we can make the case that non-neuronavigation of TMS, so traditional scalp-based measurements, works just as well, then it might be easier to implement this treatment in clinics and actually get it out to people sooner. Compensation is $50 per treatment day and $25 per follow-up. So in total, they get about $325. And this is kind of who we're referring. So my big goal for coming to Coffee and Collab is to just let you guys know, because I know we have some clinicians and researchers, maybe some case managers here. So I want to make it known that this is a treatment that we're currently running. So if you guys have anybody or know of any patients that might be suitable for this type of treatment, you can refer them to us. But yeah, they just have to be relatively stable. That's the general gist is the prime person we're looking for is predominant negative symptoms, feeling really down, and in all other cases would be generally stable. Okay. And these are our general objectives. So we want to, first of all, showcase that this treatment actually does work in reducing negative symptoms and we can actually improve patients' lives. 2, is neuronavigation necessary? If it's not, we can probably more easily offer this to people. General feasibility and safety data. This is the first time that this type of treatment, this accelerated treatment, is being used for schizophrenia. So we really want to make sure we've kind of hit all of the different markers of what's safe and what's feasible and how tolerable this type of treatment day is for participants. Additionally, going to see the other domains and see how it affects depressive symptoms, because the treatment that we're doing is already well established for depression. It's FDA approved. They're already doing it. So since depression, often a lot of schizophrenic patients have depression, we're going to kind of add on to that and just see if it improves that domain of symptoms as well. I put my email at the top. Something that's not included in these slides that I will say is that we have already finished running 2 participants, 2 patients through the full treatment week and initial follow-ups. and we've had nothing but good feedback so far. The procedure is running exactly as planned. We've had no hiccups yet. Participants are actually doing really, really well. I was expected to have a little bit more trouble with the long treatment days, but they're actually tolerating it very, very well. So it's really good news for us. And yeah, okay, I'll open up the floor for some questions. Sorry about
Yes,
talking
Rachel.
fast.
Yeah, I was just curious if you're tracking substance use just because it's, comes at high rates in people with schizophrenia, and our TMS has been shown to reduce, I think, tobacco, alcohol, cannabis, also in schizophrenia. So just wondering if you're
Yeah.
you're
We've spoken before about this.
yeah,
I
I know,
remember.
reminding you.
Yeah, so yeah, we're tracking
Okay.
substance use. Cannabis is the only substance that we're actually not excluding, because they're using, it's very hard for us to find someone with schizophrenia who's not using cannabis. So we're not excluding it. We just don't, we ask them to not consume during the day of the MRI scan. That's our only thing. And we are tracking it. So every day we do, every day of treatment is we do a full assessment for their symptoms and drug use. So every morning and every, before treatment and every end of treatment, we do a full, what have you eaten today? Have you consumed any substances? Do you plan on consuming any substances and everything? So we're going to have all the data.
So you're tracking it from like the previous visit.
Mhm. Yeah, and we include the DAST and the audit.
Okay. Yeah, and tobacco smoking. I can connect with you
Yeah.
after.
Yeah, tobacco
It's
smoke.
such a big study, you
It's
don't see
logged.
opportunities that may change with treatment.
Yeah, it would be nice. So it's in all of our follow-ups. I don't think we have a specific kind of measure tracking for tobacco use, but the data is being collected in some way or another.
Okay, good to
It's
know.
mostly qualitative, I will say, but it's there, and we do go over it with the follow-ups also.
Great. Yeah, it's a very great study. So
Thanks.
I have a quick question, Ashley. How are you, what are your recruitment methods for these patients?
We got a few. So one of them is we really ask clinicians, we just get the word out there so clinicians can refer them as they want. We have brochures everywhere. We're on clinicaltrials.gov for any clinical trial has to be posted there. So I've actually gotten a few referrals from them, mostly word of mouth, and then brochures and flyers and everything are posted in the other sites. We're also able to recruit online, which we've kind of just started doing.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, most of it's been referrals.
Perfect.
I'm not familiar with TMS. Can you explain what it is?
TMS?
Ashley, yes.
So TMS is a form of neuromodulation. The way it works is it's essentially it's a machine that creates a small localized magnetic field, and that causes your neurons to depolarize and causes action potentials and all that to essentially stimulate areas of the brain that are otherwise not being stimulated on their own to kind of trigger a cascade of events to get the brain working again. There's also inhibitory TMS, which is really cool, where it's actually being used for some auditory hallucination, where they use TMS to kind of inhibit neurons and stop them from firing as much to kind of reduce the hallucination rates, which I think is really cool. We're doing excitatory though.
hi everyone. Nice to see you all. So today I'll be talking about cannabis use and abstinence. And really, I just want to get the information out there about the cannabis withdrawal syndrome. So since cannabis is so widely used, people don't really know that it's addictive. And because it's addictive and it induces physiological change, there's a withdrawal syndrome that follows once people quit. And so today I just really want to educate any clinicians in the audience so that they see people with cannabis use, they can pass on this information or they can connect them to our lab so that people are really aware of what to expect when they do quit. And so it can hopefully help them maintain abstinence. So let me just see. Okay. So I just want to start off by probably telling you something that you already know, that cannabis use rates are really high and they're increasing. And this has been happening even before legalization, but legalization has only augmented this increase. So you can see here that rates on average in Canadians are about 23%. So if you ask a room of 100 people, a quarter of them will report using cannabis in the past year. but this varies a lot by age group. So if we look at people between the ages of 16 and 19, we see that this rate raises to 41%. And if we look in people between 20 and 24%, 20 and 24 years old, this increases to almost half of people. And I also want to point out that 7% of Canadians report daily or near daily use. And this is concerning because we know that this pattern of use is associated with a host of consequences, which I'll get to in a couple of slides. So it may not be surprising that a significant proportion of individuals actually report using cannabis to self-treat medical or mental health conditions. So this is data from the International Cannabis Policy Study, and it includes nearly 30,000 Canadians and Americans. And as you can see here, many people report using cannabis to help with physical symptoms like pain, sleep, and also mental health symptoms like depression and anxiety. So despite these motives, it's really important to emphasize that cannabis is not an approved treatment for most of the conditions that people commonly use to manage. So I just wanted to ask if anyone here knows, or anyone online, if they know what conditions cannabis is currently approved to treat. Does anyone know? Yeah. Yeah, so some of the symptoms. Yeah. Anyone else have any ideas? Okay, so cannabinoid-based medications are currently FDA approved for only a very limited number of indications. And so one of them that you mentioned is chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. So a very specific symptom-related ailments related to cancer, and also HIV and AIDS-related anorexia and weight loss, and rare pediatric epilepsy disorders. So actually in Canada, Health Canada has not authorized the use of cannabis products to treat any specific diseases or symptoms. And I think this is a really important message to get out, because I don't think the general public really realizes this. And there seems to be this big disconnect between what's actually cannabis is approved for and what people actually consume cannabis for. And so when people choose to use cannabis to self-treat mental health symptoms, they really need to be aware of some of the broader consequences of cannabis use. So I just wanted to highlight that chronic cannabis use, so heavy use, chronic use, is associated with cognitive deficits. So these are like deficits in memory, concentration, attention. Cannabis can also change the neurodevelopmental trajectory if used during adolescence. And this has been shown to increase. Sorry, it's okay.
Someone's not muted on Zoom.
So,
It's this guy.
There we go. Okay, and so cannabis use during adolescence can actually change the trajectory of neurodevelopment, and this has been associated with increased psychopathology. So we see that kids or adolescents who use cannabis during their teenage years are more likely to develop depression, anxiety, psychosis, and even schizophrenia. Sorry, let's see. Now I lost my flow. Okay, can I use this?
Yeah,
okay. Okay, and it's also cannabis use. It's not surprising. It increases the risk of developing cannabis use disorder. And this is, for people who don't know, just problematic cannabis use. So cannabis use that starts to impair people's functioning. And what we know is that higher potency cannabis use is associated with more severe adverse outcomes. And we know that potency, which is the percent of THC, so the psychoactive ingredient in cannabis, has been increasing substantially over time. So you can see here in the 70s, THC percentage was nearly 3%. Here it shows in 2020, it's 16%. But actually, if you go to the SQDC and you want to buy a cannabis product, these are closer to 20 or 30%. So cannabis is very potent, and people are using even more potent products than 20 to 30%. So unfortunately, right now, there's no approved pharmacotherapies to treat cannabis use. Many have been tested, and none of these have been approved. So our TMS is actually being tested for cannabis use with promising results also, just to piggyback off Ashley's talk, but again, far from any phase 2 trials. And what we know is that cannabis withdrawal is a major barrier to abstinence and tends to contribute to relapse. So it's really an ideal therapeutic target when we think about how to treat people with cannabis use. So I find that many people don't either think that there is a cannabis withdrawal syndrome or they're not really sure what it is. So I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to explain what it is. So it's really a constellation of symptoms, physical and mental, that emerge following the cessation or even the reduction of heavy cannabis use. It's common, so up to 90% of people who use cannabis quite frequently will experience these types of withdrawal symptoms when they quit. And it's characterized by a host of clinically significant symptoms that do interfere with daily functioning. And so some of the really common ones are things like sleep disturbance, appetite loss, as well as depression and anxiety. And many of them actually overlap with the symptoms that initially motivate people to use cannabis in the first place. And so I just also want to highlight that the severity of these symptoms are actually similar to the severity of moderate tobacco or even alcohol withdrawal. So they are quite distressing, and so distressing that they can actually reinforce use again once people quit, just to attenuate them or get rid of them altogether. So it's important to note that the trajectory of withdrawal follows a very well-characterized trajectory. So these symptoms tend to only start about 24 hours after people quit. And because there's that delay, people don't always associate the emergence of these symptoms with quitting cannabis. And then they tend to peak 7 days after people quit. And then over the next 2 to 3 weeks, they slowly dissipate, but there's actually research to show that they go well beyond this 28-day period that's shown here. But in our lab, in 2 independent samples, actually, we've been able to replicate this trajectory. So it's pretty believable, I like to say, and more groups have also established this trajectory. So it's also important to note that this trajectory represents like an average of the participants in the study. And so not everybody does experience this exact trajectory. There is some inter-individual variability. And this is something that we've been studying in our lab. Yeah. Oh, I will get to that, Lena. In like literally this slide. Okay. So we were interested in our lab to determine what kind of factors may modulate this trajectory, right? And so the first one that we wanted to look at was tobacco co-use. And the reason why we wanted to look at this is because we know that actually most people who use cannabis will also consume a nicotine or tobacco product, either within their joint, so like adding tobacco to their joint. I think I have some pictures, yeah. Or you're smoking cannabis and then also smoking cigarettes at a later time point. And there's lots of research to show that tobacco co-use is associated with higher and faster cannabis relapse rates. So there's this really nice study that showed that if you co-use both substances, you were 20 times more likely to relapse to cannabis than if you only used cannabis. And the second factor that we were interested in looking at was sex, and in particular, looking at females and how they experience withdrawal. And this is really important because since legalization, the rates of cannabis use in females has accelerated at a much faster rate than males. And actually in the States, if you look at adolescents, females are now using cannabis at higher rates than males. And to go along with this, actually females tend to be very underrepresented in cannabis research. So if you read papers, usually only 20 to 30% of the sample will be females, but lots of studies actually don't sometimes have no female representation in their samples. And this is really important because actually, if you look at the addiction literature, females tend to progress faster from like recreational the first time they use to very problematic use. And this has been termed the telescoping effect, which is just saying that they really accelerate to problematic use really, really quickly relative to males. So they tend to have higher relapse rates and overall lower cessation success compared to males. So what we wanted to do in our lab was to try to understand if cannabis withdrawal contributes to these poor treatment outcomes in people with tobacco co-use and also in females. So in our first study, we looked to see if tobacco co-use influenced the cannabis withdrawal syndrome. So this was a secondary analysis. So we had collected data in people with cannabis use disorder, and then we wanted to parse them according to their current tobacco use. So we had 20 people who completed the study, and then we parsed them in our co-users group. They used cannabis quite frequently, they met for a CUD, and they smoked 10 or more cigarettes per day. We also had a cannabis only or light tobacco use group because we couldn't find that many people who just used cannabis. And so these people either just used cannabis alone or smoked less than 5 cigarettes per day. So all participants were male in this study. They didn't have any comorbidities, and they weren't seeking treatment for cannabis. So this is our study design, and this is the one that we're currently using in our lab. And I didn't know we were allowed to put in a plug for our research studies, but I'll come back to that at the end. So we are currently running this study right now. And the way that it works is we just recruit people from the community who meet diagnosis for a cannabis use disorder or using daily or near daily. And we invite them into our lab and we ask them to quit for 28 days. So we ask them to quit 12 hours before coming into the lab for a baseline visit, and then they come in weekly. And so each week we measure withdrawal symptoms and a host of other symptoms, but for this study in particular, I'll just talk about the withdrawal symptoms. So it's a short checklist where they fill out the severity of 15 of the most commonly symptoms each week. They also fill out how much substance use they use, so not just cannabis, but also tobacco, alcohol, caffeine. We offer them brief supportive therapy just to help encourage abstinence, but what really gets people to quit is we offer contingency management. So we say that if they are successful in quitting for the full 28-day period, we will pay them a $300 bonus. And we are able to biochemically confirm this, so we just don't take people's answers at face value, but we can use cannabinoid metabolites to indeed confirm that people have been absent for the whole 28 days. Okay, so when we looked at people with cannabis only use and light tobacco use, we saw this classic withdrawal trajectory curve, right, where people slowly increased their withdrawal severity up until day 7 and then dissipated over the next 3 weeks. However, when we looked at people with cannabis and tobacco co-use, we saw a very different trajectory. So here you can see very clearly that the symptoms were elevated even at baseline and remained elevated for the extended period of abstinence. And then when we looked at females, so we had the same study design, and here we're just investigating the influence of sex, so male versus female, and how the trajectories differ between sexes. So we use the exact same paradigm, and here we show, again, in males, we had 13 males. They demonstrated the very classic withdrawal trajectory, and I will say this is a different sample than the co-use sample. So in this sample, people were smoking like very little, like 2 to 5 cigarettes, if any. And so it wasn't confounding any of our results. And when we looked at females, we saw that they experienced a very different withdrawal curve. So somewhat similar to the co-users where their withdrawal severity was elevated and remained elevated throughout the withdrawal or throughout the abstinence period. So yeah, so just to sort of sum up and have some little takeaways. So I just really wanted to emphasize the classic withdrawal trajectory and emphasize that symptoms will often worsen before they get better. And because they overlap with the symptoms that initially motivate people to use cannabis, it can reinforce the belief that cannabis use is actually helping these symptoms, right? Because they're using cannabis for their depression. It gets better when they're on cannabis. They come off cannabis. Their depression, kind of elevates because of withdrawal. And so for them, they're thinking, okay, there's this little bit of delay, this 24-hour period. So they're not necessarily linking this withdrawal to their use. And this elevation really reinforces the fact for them that cannabis is helping their symptoms. We also showed that tobacco co-use may elevate and prolong cannabis withdrawal. And we also found this for females relative to males, that they had this prolonged course of withdrawal. And so what I really want to drive home is that education about cannabis withdrawal is really important, so people understand the trajectory of what to expect in terms of their symptom fluctuations when they do quit. And so I think if they're well informed of what to expect, then it may set them up for better success. And yeah, so I just wanted to acknowledge all our funding agencies and my lab, who's been a real help in running these studies, and to all the participants, because the paradigm is quite, yeah, it's quite taxing. And so we really appreciate people and all their time and effort. And we are still recruiting people with cannabis use. So if you know anyone, it's non-treatment seeking. We're looking for people who don't want to quit. So if you know anyone or you know where we can find these people, although the community is quite effective, just posting around, you can contact me, or we have a lab website, which I didn't put up, but you can just contact me. So thank you. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. Yeah, we haven't looked at that. So the majority of our sample uses joints, so we wouldn't have enough people who use edibles or oils yet to be able to look at that. Yeah, so I'd have to get back to you as we try to increase our sample. Yeah. I will say that, like, when I didn't present it just out of time, but the co-use study and the males versus females, like the groups were just like unbelievably well matched in terms of like years of use, frequency of use, like all the parameters that you would want to control for, they just happened to be matched on them. So it wasn't like any use patterns were driving these effects. So that's a good point, yeah. Yeah, so we didn't ask them. We just said, quick, like, stop using cannabis, but we didn't want to inform them to do anything else different, because one of the things we're interested in is if you quit cannabis, what happens to other substance use? And so we were able to look at what happened to cigarettes per day, and it didn't change. So in both those study samples, in the co-use study was obviously much higher, the tobacco use per day, and it just remained like very steady throughout the whole absence period, which I wasn't expecting. I thought maybe it would increase or decrease, but I didn't expect it to stay yeah, consistent, but it did. Like that you can buy at the SQDC. I don't think so. So there's rolled joints you can buy at the SQDC, but I think they only sell cannabis products, right? So I don't think so. But like when everyone was buying off the black market, like, and even now when people go and buy dried flower in the store, they bring it home, they have their rolling papers, and they sprinkle like tobacco into it. And we actually even try to ask people like how much tobacco they put into their joints, just to try to get a sense of like, it's really hard to characterize co-use when they use like that. Cigarettes makes it really easy, but trying to get an idea of like how much tobacco exposure they have when they use in these methods like simultaneous, that's hard to quantify. But yeah. Like what's the mechanism driving higher withdrawal? Yeah, so we've looked at that in an indirect way. And so one of the theories that we think may be driving this effect, and it may be true for females too, is like exacerbated dysregulation of the endocannabinoid system. So there's lots of papers, like clinical, preclinical, showing relationships between like different endocannabinoids and even different enzyme levels of endocannabinoids that are dysregulated and correlate to like mental health symptoms, the same symptoms that are part of the withdrawal symptoms, so sleep, depression, anxiety. I mean, if people know anything about the endocannabinoid system, like it actually modulates everything in terms of like stress, cognition, sleep, emotions, reproduction, neurodevelopment. So I think it has something to do with dysregulation. And we've shown that in one paper actually with Rangini, where we looked at a small group of co-users and cannabis-only users who completed a PET scan looking at FAW concentrations, which is, I'll just say it really simply, like a biomarker of endocannabinoid signaling or activity. And we showed that in co-users, it was higher than cannabis-only users, showing that there's exacerbated dysregulation. but we didn't have enough withdrawal data to be able to correlate it with that. So we haven't like connected all of the dots, but it seems plausible. So we're running with it. We're collecting. I mean, PET scans are really expensive, but we are collecting blood samples where we'll quantify endocannabinoids in blood, hoping that they mimic brain levels. But even that, there's mixed evidence if that's true. So yeah, I mean, that's where you can help us. Yeah, I mean, people are coming in for therapy, right? But we're not using it as data. So they do like a short 50, I don't even know if it's 15 minutes, but like 10, 15 minutes, like behavioral support, really to help people maintain abstinence. And I think there people talk qualitatively about, what their symptoms. So that's what we have now. But actually, this afternoon, I'm meeting with a qualitative researcher because one thing that I think we need to do a better job of is characterize the withdrawal syndrome in females, right? And so all like the withdrawal questionnaire that I spoke about was validated in like all male samples. And so we just assume that females experience the same withdrawal symptoms, but we don't know. Their withdrawal symptoms could be very different. So we actually need to do qualitative interviews to understand like what people are experiencing and not just assume that it's one of those 15 symptoms. So it's an area that we're trying to grow a little bit, but I'm not qualitative. I don't do qualitative research, so I need help. If anyone in the audience can help, I'd be grateful. Yeah. Well, actually, there is, and I've been on it, and that's how I know we need to do this research. And so, like actually one thing that I learned kind of late in the game was that the like hormones actually modulate the endocannabinoid system. So depending on where females are in their cycle, they can have different endocannabinoid activity. And so we're trying to link what data we have of like where females are in their cycle to withdrawal and to endocannabinoid levels. But this is why females were excluded in the first place from all these studies, is because it's really hard to do. Nobody knows what day of their period they're on, right? Everyone's cycle is different. If you're taking contraceptives, it adds another variable. So it's really messy, but considering where rates are going in females, it's really important. So we're trying. We've taken on the challenge.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering, did anyone drop out of the study so far? And if so, when did you?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I like to boast most about is our retention rates. Like, they're amazing. So, okay, so usually most people drop out from the screening to the baseline, which I think is common in a lot of research. But once people start the study, like I'd say less than 10% have dropped out. And we actually, I didn't present this data, we actually randomized people to a not quit arm. And we also have dropouts in that arm. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily because people are absent. Like people actually really like the study. And sometimes people are upset that they get randomized to the not quit group. Like they want the opportunity to try to quit. And I don't think it's the $300 that's really driving the incentive. Like people just seemed like they wanted an opportunity, like to try to quit. Because it's on a lot of people's minds. They're just like, I don't know, just nothing like pushes them, I guess, to actually quit. And so the feedback that we get from the study is actually really good, and not a lot of dropouts. And the absence rates are probably hovering around like 80 to 85%. So most people are pretty successful.
Bonjour. Alors, je suis Mireille Valois, je suis la coordonnatrice professionnelle du programme de soutien en emploi-études IPS. IPS, c'est pour Individual Placement and Support. Puis je présente avec Audrey aujourd'hui.
Oui, bonjour, Audrey Morrissette, je suis conseillère en emploi au programme IPS, puis je travaille avec CLSC DLL, donc Dorval-Lachine-Lassalle, en santé mentale jeunesse.
Donc, on va vous faire une petite présentation, premièrement, juste vous parler un peu de l'historique du modèle, les principes, puis Audrey va aussi présenter un exemple de sa pratique. Donc, au Québec, avant les années 2000, dans les services de réadaptation en santé mentale, le modèle qui prévalait, c'était d'entraîner les personnes qui ont un problème de santé mentale grave pour ensuite les placer sur le marché régulier. Donc, moi, quand je suis arrivée, parce que ça fait très longtemps que je travaille ici, quand je suis arrivée, il y avait des ateliers protégés. Dès qu'une personne avait un diagnostic santé mentale grave, c'est la seule option qui était offerte à elle. Au Newman, au centre Wellington, il y avait des tables avec des personnes qui faisaient des petits travaux, comme mettre des choses dans des sacs. Donc, on se disait, on doit entraîner les gens à se lever le matin, à gérer leurs symptômes, à prendre soin de leur hygiène, à socialiser avant de leur offrir une opportunité sur le marché régulier. Mais le problème, c'est que ça ne fonctionnait pas. Il y a presque personne qui se rendait au marché régulier. Dans les années 70-90, aux États-Unis, puis plus tard au Québec, on a été influencé par le mouvement du rétablissement. Je ne sais pas si vous connaissez Patricia Deegan, qui est une des fondatrices de ce mouvement-là. Donc, c'est des personnes qui eux-mêmes vivaient un problème de santé mentale, puis qui se sont levées pour crier haut et fort, pour avoir des soins plus humains, puis avoir le droit d'avoir une vie plus satisfaisante, d'être autonome. Donc, ce que les gens voulaient, puis veulent encore, ben, c'est de travailler, d'étudier, d'avoir un logement, d'avoir un amoureux, une amoureuse. Donc, les fondateurs du modèle IPS, c'est un modèle qui vient des États-Unis, Drake et Becker, ce qu'ils se sont dit, c'est que ça ne fonctionne pas, entraîner les gens puis les placer, donc on va juste renverser l'équation. On va les placer tout de suite sur le marché régulier, mais on va leur offrir beaucoup de soutien pour qu'ils se maintiennent. Donc, on va les former, les entraîner, mais une fois qu'ils sont en emploi. Ce modèle-là fonctionne beaucoup mieux. C'est un modèle qui est implanté partout à travers le monde, en Amérique du Nord, au Japon, en Australie, en Europe. Donc, il y a eu beaucoup d'études. C'est une pratique qui est fondée sur les données probantes. C'est dans les meilleures pratiques en santé mentale. Il y a eu entre 15 et 20 études qui ont démontré que les personnes qui reçoivent les services du programme IPS ont 3 fois plus de chances de trouver un emploi sur le marché régulier versus d'autres programmes traditionnels de soutien en emploi. Euh, le modèle est en constante évolution. Il s'adapte à d'autres populations aussi, comme ici au CIUSSS, on dessert des cliniques en santé mentale comme ACT, l'étape, mais on a adapté nos services à des jeunes en période de transition avec lesquels Audrey travaille, les jeunes de la clinique PEP, puis on a un nouveau projet pour les personnes en situation d'itinérance. Donc, dans la pratique, qu'est-ce qu'on fait dans le modèle IPS? Bien, on suit 8 principes. On les suit assez religieusement. C'est prouvé que chaque principe est corrélé avec des meilleurs résultats. Donc, plus on suit les principes, on a plus de gens qui travaillent. Le premier principe, donc on va vous les présenter, puis Audrey va vous les illustrer avec sa pratique. Le premier principe, c'est l'exclusion zéro. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Mais c'est que c'est seulement la motivation qui est importante pour participer à notre programme. Donc, peu importe si la personne, elle est instable au niveau de ses symptômes, qu'elle consomme, qu'elle est instable au niveau du logement, on va l'accepter au programme IPS. Pourquoi? Bien, 2 raisons. Parce que premièrement, nous, les praticiens en santé mentale, on est des très mauvais prédicteurs de qui réussit ou non à s'intégrer avec succès. Il y a eu des études pour le démontrer, puis je pense qu'Audrey et moi, on pourrait vous donner beaucoup d'exemples où on pensait que ça ne fonctionnerait pas du tout, mais finalement, la personne réussit à s'intégrer. Donc, l'impact, selon les études, l'impact du modèle qu'on utilise est beaucoup plus fort que les variables individuelles. On n'a pas réussi à identifier de variables qui vont prédire qui se réintègre avec succès ou non. Le deuxième principe, c'est le principe qui prime sur tous les autres, c'est le respect des préférences des personnes parce qu'on utilise vraiment une approche basée sur le rétablissement. Alors, on respecte le type d'emploi que les personnes veulent occuper, combien de temps elles veulent mettre pour leur transport, pour se rendre au travail. On respecte aussi les informations qu'elles veulent partager à l'employeur. Là, je vous parle plus d'emploi, mais on a aussi ajouté le soutien aux études il y a quelques années à notre programme. Donc, on aide aussi pour le soutien aux études. Donc, on laisse vraiment les personnes faire des essais, apprendre de leurs expériences, donc la dignité du risque. Troisième principe, c'est la planification des bénéfices. Comme il y a vraiment plusieurs personnes dans nos services qui reçoivent des prestations gouvernementales comme l'aide sociale, mais on va prendre le temps de s'asseoir avec chaque personne pour leur expliquer comment un salaire va impacter leurs prestations parce que c'est comme leur filet de sécurité. On va les aider dans la déclaration de leurs revenus. On va les aider aussi à trouver un financement pour leurs études. Et un autre principe qui nous diffère des autres programmes, je ne sais pas si vous connaissez l'arrimage, par exemple, mais c'est que le conseiller IPS est directement intégré à l'équipe clinique. Donc, il va avoir un bureau à l'équipe, il va participer aux réunions. Et ce principe-là fait en sorte que toute l'équipe multidisciplinaire collabore puis contribue à l'objectif d'emploi. Donc, l'emploi fait partie du plan de traitement. Alors, je laisse la parole à Audrey pour la suite.
Merci. Donc, je continue dans les principes. Donc, un autre des principes, c'est d'aller vers le marché régulier et la recherche d'emploi rapide. Ça veut dire qu'on va vraiment vers des emplois qui sont ouverts à tout le monde. Fait que les offres d'emploi que vous voyez sur Indeed, sur peu importe les sites de recherche d'emploi, c'est vraiment des emplois réguliers, donc pas des emplois subventionnés ou des emplois adaptés, des passes-actions. Je ne sais pas s'il y en a qui connaissent ça. Donc, l'employé reçoit un salaire comme tout le monde et tout. C'est vraiment le but, c'est de déstigmatiser. Donc, que tu aies un problème de santé mentale ou pas, tu as le droit à un emploi comme tout le monde. Puis, recherche d'emploi rapide, c'est que dans les 30 premiers jours, on essaie vraiment d'aller dans la communauté, d'aller porter des CV, nous, d'aller rencontrer des employeurs. Donc, voilà. C'est quoi pour changer de petit? Oui. Développement d'un réseau d'employeurs, dans le fond, une grosse partie de notre travail, c'est de justement faire la sensibilisation de notre programme. Donc, on va voir différents employeurs, on leur parle de notre programme, qu'on travaille avec des gens qui ont des troubles de santé mentale, mais qui ont aussi d'expérience d'emploi, ils ont des forces, ils sont capables de travailler, puis qu'on est présent pour assurer un soutien puis la réussite de l'emploi. Fait qu'on on crée comme un réseau d'employeurs qu'on connaît, des contacts, fait que ça facilite l'embauche. Soutien intensif à long terme, ben, ce qui nous différencie aussi, c'est que dans le fond, on fait un soutien qui est à long terme, fait que, tu sais, au moins 1 an avec la personne. On y va selon les besoins, fait que ça veut dire qu'en début d'emploi, on peut rencontrer la personne 3 fois dans la même semaine. Si besoin, on peut l'accompagner en milieu de travail, on peut l'accompagner pour l'entrevue, ça dépend vraiment. On y va, comme on a dit plus tôt, avec les préférences de la personne, fait on donne le soutien qui est requis. Voilà. Puis aussi, j'ai impliqué la famille, c'est que ça veut dire on essaie d'impliquer, surtout avec les jeunes, d'impliquer un membre de la famille ou une personne de confiance, dans le fond, dans le suivi. Fait que je vais juste ramener à ici la roue des principes. Dans le fond, je vais vous donner un petit exemple d'une intégration d'emploi que j'ai fait quand même récemment pour vous donner une idée qui inclut pas mal les principes, dans le fond, de l'approche. C'était un jeune, dans le fond, quand on parle d'exclusion zéro, puis tu sais, de la motivation, il ne veut pas nécessairement dire que le jeune s'engage et est présent à toutes ses rencontres, qui est là à l'heure. Ça ne veut pas nécessairement dire ça, tu sais. Parce que des fois, on voit, ah, ben le jeune ne s'est pas présenté, il n'est pas motivé. Ben, nous, dans notre approche, c'est pas ça. On va essayer d'engager la personne. S'il ne se présente pas, on va voir avec lui, y a-tu un endroit où tu veux qu'on se rencontre? Tu veux qu'on aille y a-tu une place où tu aimerais aller? Est-ce que tu aimerais que ta mère soit présente? Fait qu'avec ce jeune-là, dans le fond, j'ai commencé à le rencontrer à domicile pour que de plus en plus, on se rencontre en communauté au Tim Hortons. On a fait les étapes de la recherche d'emploi parce que lui, il voulait travailler en restauration ou en entretien paysager. Donc, on a impliqué la mère. La mère s'est présentée au début dans les rencontres. Elle nous a aidé à faire le CV parce que le jeune, multiple diagnostic, donc vraiment de la difficulté à se concentrer, là, plus que, je vous dirais, là, en rencontre, il n'arrivait pas à se concentrer. J'aurais vraiment pu facilement dire, mon Dieu, ce jeune-là ne sera jamais capable de travailler. La mère, elle m'aidait, tu sais, pour que, OK, qu'est-ce qu'on peut mettre dans le CV, puis marquer les forces et tout ça. Puis, vite, je suis allée voir des employeurs dans le domaine de la restauration. La mère voyait on a pris un conseil de la mère qu'elle disait, ah, je verrais beaucoup de jeunes travailler dans ce type d'emploi. Je suis allée voir l'employeur. La mère était déjà allée avec le jeune porter des CV, ça n'avait jamais rien donné. Je suis allée, j'ai présenté notre service. L'employeur il a dit, ben là, on va l'essayer, ou pourquoi pas. Fait un exemple dans le fond, on a discuté avec l'employeur des accommodements, de ce qui serait intéressant pour que le jeune, ça fonctionne dans le milieu de travail. On a commencé par 1 heure. J'étais là, j'observais. Le jeune venait me voir, il était comme, il reste combien de temps? Oh, j'ai mal au ventre, j'ai mal au cœur. OK, concentre-toi sur tes tâches, il reste tant de temps. J'ai fait ça, j'étais allée le porter au travail, dans le fond, toutes les premières journées. Là, il est rendu, dans le fond, cette semaine à 2 jours semaine, 3 heures par jour. Euh, je vais le porter une des 2 journées, puis je reste pas. Fait que, puis ça se passe bien. Fait que c'est vraiment un exemple d'un jeune qui a vraiment besoin d'énormément de soutien pour que ça fonctionne. Un contact avec l'employeur. Laissé à lui-même, je suis pas sûre que ça aurait fonctionné, mais avec le soutien, dans le fond, on arrive à des réussites. Fait que voilà. C'est ça. Donc, des questions?
On est 6 conseillers dans le CIUSSS. Donc, on a un conseiller à ACT, un à l'étape, l'autre au PEP. Puis, on a un conseiller dans l'ouest de l'île qui dessert ACT, PEP et CIV. Mais malheureusement, on est juste 6. Donc, on a subi des coupures. Alors, on ne peut pas desservir plus, mais on a un nouveau projet. Fait que si il y a des chercheurs dans la salle, on a un nouveau projet avec les personnes itinérantes aussi. Donc, au fil des années, on adapte le modèle. Mais au départ, c'était pour les adultes qui ont un problème de santé mentale. Puis, on a eu un projet de recherche pour les jeunes. Puis là, on a un autre avec les personnes en situation d'itinérance. Ouais.
Et juste après, il y a combien de jeunes qui participent au programme en ce moment?
C'est ça.
C'est ça. On a vu qu'on est comme une équipe style ACT, donc on donne un soutien intensif, c'est pas plus que 20 personnes desservies par conseiller. Donc, les jeunes, je ne sais pas, comme par année, on dessert environ 330 personnes en tout. Mais les cliniques pour les jeunes, c'est peut-être comme le tiers à peu près là, qu'on dessert par année. Ouais.
Ouais. 12-25 ans, dans le fond. Oui, c'est ça, c'est 12-25 ans. Le jeune là que j'ai présenté, il y a 17 ans. Mais c'est ça, on dessert jusqu'à 25. Fait que c'est des jeunes adultes. Puis c'est pile dans le moment où justement, là, université, cégep, secondaire. Fait que c'est ça, on fait aussi le soutien aux études. Fait que dans le fond, tout ce qui s'applique à l'emploi, on le fait aussi dans la communauté pour le soutien aux études. Fait qu'aller dans les écoles, faire les visites, aller faire accompagner un jeune pour un élève d'un jour. Donc, vraiment, mettre les soutiens en place, les accommodements dans les universités et cégep. Et si je peux rajouter aussi en lien avec ta question, dans le fond, on dessert 1 à 2 cliniques maximum pour justement vraiment s'intégrer aux équipes parce que c'est vraiment beaucoup de travail de s'intégrer à une nouvelle équipe pour vraiment que ça, tu sais, on a un bureau dans cet endroit-là, on participe aux réunions cliniques. Fait que, si on dessert 4 équipes, ben, ça veut dire 4 réunions, assister aux 4 réunions, ça serait beaucoup trop. Là, on n'aurait plus le temps pour nos clients, nos adultes. Puis, fait que c'est ça. Fait que c'est vraiment, on est vraiment attitré à une équipe ou 2. Maximum.
Je pense que
Oui.
c'est